All right. Well, thank you so much for being here this evening. Today we have a student panel with us to explain the online Master of Science in Software Engineering to give you more of an insight from the student's perspective about the program and all the exciting opportunities here at Purdue University. Today we will start the evening off with introductions so you can learn more about the moderators and the panelists on this call. We will then share more information about the online Master of Science in Software Engineering here at Purdue University. We will then go into our questions for the student panel so that you can learn more about the program. We will then cover admission next steps, and then we will finish off with taking questions from our attendees. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions and you want to make sure that you get those out there without forgetting those, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. We will get to those questions at the end of this call. I am one of your moderators. My name is Eve, and I am an enrollment counselor here at Purdue University, supporting our online Master of Science in Software Engineering. And with us, we do have Lynn Hedgewold. She is the program manager for the Electrical and Computer Engineering Master's Program at the Elmore Family School of Electrical and Computer Engineering. We will be reaching out to everyone that registered for this event via email with the recording of this webinar, as well as any important information that would be helpful for you to know, including our emails. So if you have any questions, you are invited to take a picture of this screen so that you have our contact information, or you can wait until we reach out to you via email. We will go ahead and get started with Lynn sharing a little bit more about the online Masters of Science in Software Engineering.
Thank you, Eve, and welcome everyone. We're really glad you could join us this evening. I hope this session is useful for you. I always like to start these sessions by just providing a little bit of background about the degree. You've probably done some research on your own, but some of the key things that make our program unique, other than the fact that it's from Purdue, this program is fully online, but all of our students earn the same degree. So we offer a Master of Science in Software Engineering for residential students as well, and then for online students. All of our students are earning the exact same degree. They're taking the same courses with the same faculty and getting the same diploma. The program does require 30 credit hours, and almost all the students in this program are working professionals. Some of them are right out of college, and some of them have been working for a little while. So you can complete the coursework on your schedule. Although the courses are not self-paced, each course will have a schedule. You'll have certain things to do each week, but obviously our working students, do their coursework in the evening, mainly on the weekends, and that works just fine. Our students typically take 1 to 3 courses per semester, depending on whether they are full-time or part-time. And then you can complete the degree in as little as 1 year if you are full-time. And we do allow up to 6 years, but most of our students are taking 3 to 4 years to complete the degree. So our program is very flexible, which is another benefit to master's programs within our area. Some programs or online programs that you'll find are very prescribed, where all the students come in and take this class and then this class and this class. Our program doesn't work that way. We have, within software engineering, we have these 4 areas of interest shown on the right side of the slide here. And you get to choose the courses that you want to take. We do have some basic curriculum requirements with just a couple required courses, and we'll send you a link to that information on the website. But if you're interested in, a couple of these areas, that's certainly fine. You can take courses from a couple of those areas. If you have an interest in all of these areas, that's fine too. You get to choose the ECE courses that you want to take. This is also a reduced price program. It's $950 a credit hour. So for 30 credit hours, that's $28,500. Most of our students, again, as I mentioned, are working professionals and do use tuition reimbursement through their employer. So these are really the big picture benefits of our program.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing, Lynn. We will now go ahead and introduce our student panelists today. We do have Anthony Buolo, who unfortunately was not able to make it, but we are super excited to have James with us today. James is joining us today from the East Coast. He is currently a student pursuing the machine learning and data science focus area, and he is in his second semester. So today we will be sharing some really helpful, exciting insight from him as we explore the program in more detail. And we are actually going to go ahead and get started with talking about Purdue University. James, so we are curious to know what made you select Purdue University's online Master of Science in Software Engineering over other options that you may have seen online or in person?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Hey everybody, gonna give myself a little bit of background. I got my degree in computer engineering from the University of Maryland, and I am currently working in the defense industry, mostly doing embedded software engineering. So, yeah, so I took a little bit of a semester break or a break out of out of college. I graduated 2024. So, and I started this program 2025, and then I took a semester off. So it's my second semester. And when I was looking into the program, fortunately, my job gave me a bunch of options of programs I can, look into. Georgia Tech has a really good software engineering master's program. I looked into that, as well as I think UT Austin. So those are all nice, but what made Purdue stand out for me was I think you guys are rated about pretty high up there for graduate online programs for engineering. So that definitely gave me some interest as well as name recognition. Purdue's pretty well known, so I think that pulled me over. And also the machine learning and data science track was pretty, I would say, specific to what I want to go towards in my career. And so far, it has been fruitful in my studies.
Thank you so much for sharing. And as I explained earlier, we do also have our program manager with us. Lynn, do you have anything to comment on based on James' answer?
Excuse me. Yes. So James, thank you for that information. I did want to mention that this program is relatively new for Purdue, but we do have a master's in electrical and computer engineering that we've been, or a very large online program for electrical and computer engineering. That program is ranked #1 by U.S. News and World Report, and many of our programs at Purdue, overall graduate engineering education, as well as a number of our specific programs and undergraduate programs are ranked in the top 10 by U.S. News and World Report. So we're real proud of that. We feel like our program is, as I mentioned, it's not only affordable, but it's also from a top quality university.
Thank you so much for sharing. Well, we covered some information about why Purdue was a institution that you selected. So now let's dig a little bit deeper and talk about those courses. Reflecting on your experience and your interactions that you have had with our courses, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about the courses offered. Are those courses offered what you find to be adequate? And with that, we can talk about, do you feel like these courses are not only offering information that pertains to you, but information that is accessible to you as an online student?
So I would say that the courses are pretty covering of, you know, uh, the current times with artificial intelligence, NVIDIA, the hardware that comes with that. So I would say, yeah, it's pretty adequate. Um, what I would look for more artificial intelligence related courses, but I would say that it's such a fast industry and it moves pretty quickly. So it's I want to say it's like that's something easy to keep up with. So, but I will say the courses I've taken so far, they've done well with translating recent advances into the coursework, which I wouldn't necessarily say is an easy thing to do to make sure that that blends well in the class. Um, so yeah, I would say it's adequate.
That's great to hear. And as you are navigating through taking these courses online, How do you find the workload to be? Is it something that you would say is manageable? Do you find it challenging to be able to balance the actual workload week to week? Is it something that matches your expectations? What does that actual workload look like for you?
So I would say, like most courses, it definitely depends on the professor. So far I've taken um, I'm only in my second semester, so I've taken three 2 credit classes, and I've taken one credit class, which is only a month, which I would say I would have liked to be a little longer because the the coursework was really put well together, but I think it could have been spaced out to go deeper in the concept, which kind of goes back to the first question. But I would say the courses are definitely feasible, manageable if you can manage your time well. Taking 6 credits while working isn't something you can necessarily do without good time management. So I would say that's important. Um, so I will say if you can definitely manage your time, like I said, I'm only taking 4 credits this semester, so hasn't been too difficult. But if you can manage your time, set aside, okay, I need to look at these lectures, study um, this amount of days per week, maybe twice per week, maybe on the weekends if you have more free time. I think it's definitely manageable.
Thank you so much for sharing. And Lynn, I know you are a pivotal individual when it comes to these courses and knowing about these courses and helping students register for courses. Do you have any comments or anything to add as we talk about courses here at Purdue?
Yeah, just a couple things to add. So Purdue is an R1 research university, and within ECE, we have over 120 faculty members. And computer engineering, which is where the software engineering subset falls, is our largest area where most of our faculty are from. And so we have a good number of faculty members who are working on AI and machine learning, and other topics relevant to software engineering. So the courses are influenced by the research that they're doing, and there's all kinds of, cutting edge research going on at Purdue. We also have new courses introduced every semester, and I will say a lot of those are in this AI and machine learning and computer engineering area. So I think, again, it's a flexible program, but the students have a lot of options, and I think we do offer a lot of courses in topics that students want. Um, James, one thing I wanted to ask you, when it comes to, the course administration, uh, I assume you did your undergraduate degree in person. So what do you find the online experience? Was that a fairly easy transition for you, or what have you encountered there as far as moving from like a residential program to an online program?
Yeah, well, I would say fortunately or unfortunately, depending how you look at it, I was a student during COVID, so I was
Oh,
able to have a little bit of a familiarity with that. But I will say it's not too different. I like to ask questions, so I would say that's the only thing that you kind of have to set your questions aside for office hours or for emails. But in terms of lectures, just sitting down and watching them isn't too different than being in person.
yeah, yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. And that's actually the perfect transition because our next few questions are about that support that you have as an online student. So, James, I'm curious to know, how do you find that those interactions with instructors and faculty are for you as an online student? Do you find that they are accessible or not accessible? And what does that responsiveness look like?
Yeah, I would say this definitely varies. I want to say it's ever like, oh, I can't get a response at all. But I will say, depending on the piazza, you might have a more active TA compared to a less active TA, or more active professor more compared to a less active professor. But I will find that I've never, reached out to email a professor and they didn't respond within that day or probably, the next day. Um, so I would say it's pretty well. Also, uh, Lynn, I've reached out to Lynn a bunch of times and she's been very helpful. So I will say definitely the faculty and everybody. Uh, you guys been great.
That's great to hear. And it sounds like Piazza and faculty are great resources that you have utilized. I'm curious to know what other type of academic support you have found to be most useful during your experience as an online student.
I would say I've something that's I found interesting from just Purdue in general is like the amount of type of student things they have going on. I think recently there was a meeting for like cash. Basically, it was some guy talking about um cash and proficiencies from um transformers. So I think stuff like that is pretty interesting um to look into. You get lens from real professionals or people who are really doing the research themselves. Um, yeah, I would say, Piazza is pretty helpful if that can fall into that category because you get to just quickly ask a question. And I would say those are about my answers.
Thank you so much for sharing. And as we are further exploring some of those resources, when it comes to actual human resources that you have, like faculty, those TAs that you mentioned, have you found that as an online student, you are still able to build meaningful mentorship or professional relationships with your professors?
Well, I don't know my professors, but I will say like group members because we're all usually working and professionals. It feels more of you're amongst peers, so it feels better to build. You can more easily build those relationships with those. Sometimes your group members are um, much older than you, or uh, even from a different country. So I think that's very interesting
Mhm.
to get their perspectives relating to coursework. So I would say those are definitely more of so the relationships I foster. But like I said, it's pretty easy to reach out to professors. So
Thank you so much for sharing. And Lynn, it sounds like you are a great resource here within the program. So given that you are a great resource and you help put these resources together for students, what are your thoughts on support for online students?
Yeah, yeah. So, being an online student is never going to be like being a residential student. It's a completely different experience. But we do, a couple things at Purdue that might be different from what you'll find elsewhere. First of all, overall, teaching is very important to us in ECE. We are a major research university, but the quality of our teaching is important to us. And we work really hard to make sure that our courses are as structured as well as we can. And we're certainly not perfect, but it is a priority for our department. So I think that's important. Myself as the program manager, I'm very cognizant of student needs, and I'm very responsive to students. If a student is frustrated or is having a problem, we don't want that at all. So we handle those things very, very quickly, in addition to just day-to-day questions that students have. So students know they hear back from me pretty quickly if they email. We think that's important as well. There's nothing worse than being an online student and not knowing who to reach out to or not being able to get answers to your questions. And so that is something that our students do not experience. I will also mention that many of our faculty have mentioned to me how much they enjoy having online students in their classes. And they really like having students who are working in industry because that learning goes both ways. The professors are obviously experts in whatever they're teaching, but those of you who are working in industry, have a unique perspective and know what's going on in that world. And, our faculty really enjoy that, getting that perspective. So that's something I've heard a number of times.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. And that then leads us to now talk about that community within the online program. James, I'm curious to know what does that interaction level look like with other online students? I know you mentioned some of those groups that you have and having found community in that, but I would love to hear more about that. What do those interactions look like through discussion boards, group projects, or even networking?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty great in terms of interactions. I think graduate level, group projects definitely have a stigma kind of around them, but I think graduate level group projects, especially amongst people who are working full time, kind of comes with a level of I don't want to say professionalism because we're not necessarily working, but definitely a level of okay, we have meetings, we're going to meet at this time. It definitely makes it a lot easier. Um, I would say conversations. We're all usually interested in doing what we're doing. Like it's graduate program. You're usually taking classes that uh, have something to do with what you do as a career. So I think that's interesting to talk to other people who what they do and how this relates to their career. Um, yeah. So far I've only had two group projects. Um, and the occasional discussion board post here and there between my classes. Um, and yeah, like I said, despite the stigma around group projects, it does usually go pretty well. And especially when you guys are, working on something interesting, working on something that you feel like, oh, this relates to my career. Maybe I can use this when I'm working. So I would say definitely good experience.
That's great to hear. And through those experiences that you just shared with us, do you find that you find a sense of community or connection through those experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, we can all connect to that fact that we're online students while working. So I think that definitely provides that sense of community. Um, we usually I think I'm gathering most of my experience on my first group project, as well as my recent one. But my first group project, all of us was working, but we all had interest in embedded engineering. So we basically worked on our operating system and did some things with the paging table, which was pretty interesting to all of us. So I think when you have a group and you guys all have a common interest, we're all professionals, as we're all online, I think it definitely makes that community feel like it's there.
Thank you so much for sharing. And Lynn, as someone that constantly communicates with students, what do you find that students mention about community and having that sense of belonging and interaction at Purdue?
Yeah, again, it is tough with an online program because, it's just not the same as being residential. But I think that, within our program, students do have opportunities to, work with their peers. James has mentioned Piazza a couple times. That is a discussion board tool that we use for almost all of our courses. It makes it really easy for all of our students to get quick answers from not just the teaching team, but also their peers. Um, so, oh, I totally lost my train of thought there. Sorry. Um, Again, I think another thing is, I communicate with the students on a very regular basis, and even again, just getting those easy questions answered, I think makes a big difference for students who are not residentially with us at Purdue.
Thank you so much for sharing. So we talked about community and that with community, sometimes you might find that some students share some similar challenges that they experience. So let's talk a little bit more about some challenges. James, as you have been navigating through the program and getting your feet wet and feeling more accustomed to the program now, what are some challenges that you now identify that you faced, although you did not necessarily expect them immediately when you first started this program?
Well, I would say my biggest challenge would definitely be just work, school balance, living my life, trying to have fun, but as well as working and doing, being in school. I wouldn't say that that was necessarily unexpected, but it definitely is, once you're in the thick of it, it's definitely something you have to plan for and, uh, execute uh, properly. So I would say that's the biggest challenge, just navigating that work-life balance and making sure you section off enough time for school.
Thank you so much for sharing. And as you talk about that, very delicate balance between balancing that academic life with other responsibilities. What are some ways that you have found that are skills and tips that you have for how you balance all your outside responsibilities?
Yeah, I would say just plan it for a weekend for the most part. Like I feel like doing work after or doing schoolwork after work is kind of exhausting sometimes. So I'd rather do that on the weekend. And if you can maybe uh I'm a little lucky so that sometimes during work I can sneak a lecture in. So if you can maybe, do something like that, make sure that it's not, you can do your work while it's not super inconvenient. I think that helps a lot.
Awesome. And I know one of your strategies, like you mentioned, is working during the weekend or finding times during your work hours to get some work done. But do you have any other tips for future students on how to stay on track with those deadlines and course responsibilities?
Yeah, I would definitely say just try to plan it out as well. Like don't try to just go at it start the week like how am I going to do this? Know how many lecture videos come out, per week. Maybe plan when you're going to watch those videos. And I think worst comes to shove, it's always nice to just reach out to your TAs or your professors. They're usually pretty nice to just, oh, I understand you can have an extension, whatever, yada yada yada. So I would say, they treat you as people or more like adults. So I would say, um, those are definitely my strategies.
Thank you so much for sharing. And Lynn, you are someone that works with both the online and the residential program, so you have very unique viewpoints on how both programs differ. When it pertains to the online program, what are some strategies that you think students should have in balancing some of these challenges?
Yeah, they're really not a whole lot different than the strategies that you learned about when you were an undergrad. Go to class or watch the lectures in this case. And one of the things that I tell students all the time is it's easier to keep up than catch up. And with an online program, it's easy to say, well, I'll do it tomorrow, or well, I'll do it tomorrow. And then, Sunday afternoon rolls around and you've got homework due that night and you haven't done anything yet. So it does, being successful in an online program does require a certain amount of discipline and motivation. So, just something to think about as you consider a program like this.
Thank you so much for sharing. And we have one final question for James. James, as you think about your time here at Purdue and your next upcoming years, what is one piece of information or advice that you wish that prospective students knew before enrolling into the program?
I would say it's easier than you expect. You can do it definitely. Um, and I would say for this particular program, like you said, Lynn and you guys are very responsive, and I think that's really important for us online students. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, am I annoying you guys? But you guys respond quick anyways, and I think that's super important because there's a lot of I don't want to say hoops you have to jump through, but sometimes you might have a block and you may not know why, or you may want to enroll and you don't know your pin, so there's things that you have to, ask. So if you're looking for a program with like, responsive faculty and if you want to keep up with the recent advances in technology, like you said, I think you have people who are researching currently, and what they're researching currently is in their classes, and I can see that because you know I I look into like CUDA and NVIDIA and stuff, so I think it's a great program, and I would recommend it.
Thank you so much for sharing. And Lynn, what's something that you would recommend as someone that has seen different type of applicants and students go through the program? What is one piece of advice that you wish that prospective students knew before enrolling?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the challenges with our program, as I mentioned, it's very flexible. So you have a lot of course choices and a lot of flexibility, which is great because you can really focus the program on what you want, but you do have to spend a little bit of time figuring out, what courses are you going to take, what order you're going to take them in, which ones are going to run each semester, what are the prerequisites, and so on. So students who sit down and kind of map that type of thing out, I think will be maybe a little more successful. I mean, everybody has to complete 30 credit hours, but you're probably going to get the most out of it and maximize, the courses that you're really interested in if you do sit down and take the time to sort of map that out. And I talk to students about that all the time. But that is probably the tip that I would recommend.
Thank you so much for sharing. Lynn and James, your insight, advice, and words has been extremely helpful, not only to me, but also to our students that are on this call, and hopefully will be reviewing this recording. So thank you so much for sharing your insight. It truly is very valuable. And hopefully, after getting more information from a current student, you are ready to join the Boilermaker family. So, for admission consideration into this program, we do ask that you have a working knowledge of relevant topics. We have a very helpful resource that we will include via email. It is our self-assessment. On our self-assessment, you can learn more about some of the information that I do have here on this slide, but we would love for you to have a working knowledge of algorithms, data structures. When it comes to math, we do ask that you come in with a strong background in math. To us, that means having calculus 1, 2, and 3, linear algebra, discrete mathematics, and especially probability and statistics, as those math classes are going to be really pivotal in success in the program. We also ask that you come in with a compatible undergraduate degree. That usually means computer engineering or computer science. Those are our preferred background programs. But if you have any questions about your specific background and how that might fit with our admission requirements, you could always reach out to either Lynn or I via email, and we are happy to talk to you through that. Once you know that you have met all of our prerequisites, you will be submitting your application. The application is found online. With your application, you will submit transcripts from all universities attended. Even if you did not graduate from an institution, we still need that transcript so that we can truly see all the courses that you have taken. If you are an international student, we will also need for you to submit the original transcript in its original language, as well as English translated copies. We do also ask that you submit 3 letters of recommendation. These letters of recommendation must be professional, academic, or a mix of both. When you submit the application, we will ask for you to submit the contact information, including the email addresses for those recommenders, and we will go ahead and reach out to them on your behalf so that they can submit those recommendation letters through a safe link that we will provide for them. You will also submit 2 different writing statements. One is an academic statement of purpose, the other is a personal history statement. Essentially, these 2 documents tell us more information that we wouldn't be able to get from your other application documents. If you have any questions about what to include on those, we have really helpful guides on our website that include some really helpful prompts that we will also go ahead and include in the email that we will follow up with. The biggest thing that we want you to focus on as you are developing those statements is to keep in mind that both statements ask for very similar questions. So you want to make sure that you are not duplicating the information found on both documents, but more so complementing each other with that information that you will provide in those statements. You will also submit a professional resume. If you have any research or internship experience, that's something that we are interested in knowing about. So certainly do include that in that resume as well. And if you are an international student, you may need to submit the TOEFL or the IELTS as your English proficiency score exam. Once we have all of these application materials, your application is then considered complete and then ready for review. It does take us an average of 3 to 4 weeks or so for us to make admissions decisions. But if you have any questions about where your application is in the funnel, you could always reach out to me, and I am happy to share more information about where you are in the funnel, or if maybe you are missing an application material. Len, do you have anything to add to any of that?
The only thing I will add is our current application cycle is for fall 2026, and that semester begins on August 24th, I believe, whatever that Monday is. And the deadline for applications is July 15th.
Thank you so much. Alrighty, so we have finally gotten to our question slide. So if anyone has any questions about anything that James shared with us or anything that Lynn shared with us today, please feel free to share your questions in that chat box feature or in the Q&A feature, and we will get to those questions.
So while we're waiting to see if anybody has any questions, I will just add that Eve and I are happy to pre-screen your materials if you are unsure if you have the correct background for the program, or we get a lot of questions about GPAs, students with lower GPAs. Feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to pre-screen your materials and let you know whether we think you should apply.